What if the truth they never taught you was the very thing they feared the most? What if the story you grew up hearing was only the version that made them comfortable? That question hit Marcus Hale the way a sudden shadow crosses a room, quiet but impossible to ignore. He was 16, the age where the world starts to look different once you stop taking people's answers as the whole truth. And on a warm morning in North Carolina, he walked into class carrying a notebook, a tired backpack, and a sense that today would be like every other. But at WASN single quotes T. Marcus sat in the second row, the seat he chose because it made him invisible. Not too close to the front, far enough from the back. He opened his history book, planning to skim ahead before the bell rang, but something felt off. There was a page missing. No, not missing. Ripped out, torn so cleanly that whoever removed it knew exactly what they were doing. He slid his fingers across the jagged edge and felt a strange sting of confusion. He raised his hand, calm, respectful, like he was taught. Ms. Grant, why is this chapter gone? She didn't even look up from her desk. Start from the section I assigned. He tried again, but the chapter is missing. She sighed loudly, the kind of sound that tells a whole room. Here he goes again. Marcus, follow the instructions. We don't have time for side questions. A boy in the back snickered. Another whispered something under his breath, and Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. Not the angry kind at first, more like embarrassment. The feeling of being singled out for simply noticing what everyone else pretended not to see. He lowered his hand slowly. He stared at that ripped page as if it were a brick wall someone built overnight. For the first time, he wondered if the class was learning history, or avoiding it. The lesson dragged on. The teacher talked about the Constitution and early America, skipping 5 decades of pain like they were a footnote, jumping from foundations of freedom straight into industrial progress. Marcus kept glancing back at the gap in his book. Something had been there, something important enough for someone to remove with intention. When the bell rang, he stayed in his seat a moment. His classmates rushed out, laughing, pushing, living life the easy way people do when the world fits them without question. Marcus ran his hand across the torn binding one more time. He didn't know what was missing, but he knew one thing. Someone wanted it missing. He walked home that afternoon with the sun low behind him, and a tightness in his chest he couldn't name. His neighborhood wasn't the kind with fences or fancy lawns. It was the kind where grandparents sat on porches and watched the world with tired eyes. The kind where people carried stories in their posture, in their patience, in the slow way they nodded at each other as if to say, "We made it another day." His grandfather, Elijah Hale, sat in his usual spot on the porch, a tall man, thin but solid, with hands worn from years of factory work. Marcus dropped his backpack beside him and sat on the top step, staring at the street like it had answers. "You look like something ain't sitting right," Elijah said. Marcus didn't look up. "Granddad, does school ever leave stuff out? Like on purpose?" Elijah didn't speak right away. He had the kind of silence that meant he was choosing his words carefully, not avoiding them. Finally, he nodded once. "Sometimes they don't want you seeing what made this country shake." Marcus felt that same sting in his chest. There was a whole chapter gone, ripped from the book. Elijah leaned back, breathing in slow through his nose. Then he stood and walked inside without a word. Marcus stayed still, unsure if he'd done something wrong. But when his grandfather returned, he carried an old wooden box, the kind people kept tucked away under beds and inside closets for years. "Come inside," Elijah said softly. They moved into the living room. The box clicked open. Inside were photographs so old the edges crumbled when touched. Letters tied with brown string, a Bible with names written in the margins. Elijah pulled out one photograph, black and white, faded, but still heavy with truth. A man, dark-skinned, strong-jawed, staring at the camera with eyes that refused to bow. Hands chained, posture unbroken. "This," Elijah whispered, "is your blood." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He traced the outline of the man's face with his eyes, wondering how someone could stand so firm while bound like that. "They hide what scares them," Elijah said, "and what scares them most is us knowing who we come from. Men like him survived what was meant to destroy them, and they don't ever want you to learn how strong that makes you." The words hit him harder than any lesson he'd ever heard in school. They weren't spoken from a podium or written in a polished textbook. They were raw, personal, carved from a history that hadn't been softened for comfort. Marcus swallowed hard. Why would they tear it out? "Because truth don't bend easy," Elijah said, "and folks who fear truth try to control it." Marcus sat there, staring at the photo, feeling something shift inside him, a pressure he didn't have a name for, a sense that the world he trusted had cracks he'd never noticed, a feeling that someone, somewhere, expected him to accept the shadows, instead of seeking the light. But he wasn't built that way. As the weight of the picture settled in his hands, he knew this wasn't just a missing chapter. It was a warning, a beginning, a crack in the wall that, once seen, could never be unseen. And he understood something else, too. This wasn't only about him. This was about every black kid who ever opened a book and found their truths edited away. This was about a history that refused to disappear, even when people tried to tear it from the spine. And as he looked at his grandfather, at the quiet strength etched in every wrinkle, Marcus realized the ground beneath him hadn't just shifted, it had split open. He wasn't falling. He was waking up. Marcus woke up the next morning with a strange heaviness in his chest, the kind that doesn't fade after sleep. The missing chapter stayed on his mind, like a bruise he kept pressing without meaning to. He moved through his morning routine quietly, listening to the sound of the old house settling, listening to the memory of his grandfather's voice repeating that haunting truth, "They hide what scares them." He didn't know why, but those words stuck to him like a shadow. When he reached school, nothing looked different, but everything felt different. He noticed things he used to let pass without a second thought. The cluster of honor students gathered by the library doors, none of them looked like him. The teachers greeting certain kids by name and barely glancing at others. The posters about opportunity lining the hallways, but none of those opportunities ever seemed to find kids from his side of town. It was like the building had been whispering these things the whole time, and he was only now learning how to listen. In first period, the counselor walked in for schedule reviews. She stopped at Marcus's desk, tapping the paper clipped to her clipboard. "Marcus, we need to talk about your course load. I think you'd be more comfortable in the general track instead of the college prep path." Marcus blinked. "Why?" She smiled the way adults do when they think they're helping you. "Your teachers mentioned you seem overwhelmed, and the prep classes are very demanding. Some students just fit better in the general track. It's nothing to worry about." He felt something twist inside. "I'm not overwhelmed," he whispered, but she had already moved on. Marcus stared at the back of her head, feeling his jaw tighten. She didn't ask about his grades. She didn't ask what he wanted. She didn't ask if the issue was the class, or the expectations placed on him. It was just assumed, quietly, casually, permanently. Later in the hallway he overheard two teachers talking. They didn't see him nearby. "He'd do fine if he stopped making everything complicated," one said. A second replied, "Kids like him always push back. Just keep him on track." Kids like him? The phrase echoed in his mind, sharp and bitter. He wondered what track they meant. The easy one. The one they thought he deserved. He didn't know how teachers, adults, people who barely knew him could feel so sure about his limits. During lunch, he sat with two friends, playing with his food more than eating it. The cafeteria buzzed with noise, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept replaying those small moments. The missing chapter, the counselor's assumption, the teacher's whispers. None of them were loud enough to cause a scene, but together they built a wall one brick at a time. "Yo, Marcus's friend," Devin said. "You good? You quiet today?" Marcus shrugged. "Just thinking." About what? He didn't know how to explain it without sounding dramatic. "Does it ever feel like we're being pushed a certain way? Like they've already decided who we're gonna be before we even get a chance?" Devin laughed. "Man, welcome to America." But there was no humor in it. Not really. As the day went on, the signs kept stacking. A security guard trailed him through the hall even though other kids walked by laughing and running. A teacher asked him if he understood the assignment, even though he'd finished half of it before she even checked. And when the principal passed by, her eyes rested on Marcus just a second longer than anyone else. Like she was waiting for something from him. Something wrong. Marcus felt exposed. Watched, measured by rules. No one wrote down, but everyone seemed to follow. By the afternoon, his frustration had settled into a heavy kind of anger. Not the explosive kind. The quiet, simmering kind that makes you swallow words because you know speaking them out loud won't change a thing. He walked into history class again, hoping maybe today would be different, but when he sat down, the torn chapter was still there. A gap. A lie by omission. He raised his hand again, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ms. Grant, are we ever going to talk about the part that's missing?" She stared at him as if he'd asked something ridiculous. "Marcus, focus on what's in front of you." "But something's missing," he repeated. Her eyes narrowed. "Do you want to stay after class and explain why you're causing disruptions every day?" Disruptions. That was the word she chose. Not questions. Not curiosity. Disruptions. As if his desire to know the truth was an inconvenience, something to be disciplined, controlled, quieted. A few kids chuckled. One whispered, "Just drop it, man." Marcus felt a tightness in his throat, but he stayed silent. He knew anything he said would only be twisted. He knew the teacher wasn't protecting the lesson, she was protecting the silence. The version of history that didn't make the room uncomfortable, the version that didn't include chains, stolen labor, burned towns, massacres, or the fact that the kids in that room were sitting in a system shaped by decisions made long before any of them were born. And now he knew. They weren't forgetting the truth, they were hiding it. When the bell rang, Marcus sat at his desk a little longer, fingers gripping the edge of the book. He didn't know who had ripped out the chapter. A teacher, the school, the district, but he knew why. And knowing made it impossible to unsee everything else. He left the room walking slower than usual. As he crossed the hallway, he passed a glass case filled with trophies and old yearbook photos. Dozens of faces stared back at him, almost all of them white. He'd walked past that case for years without thinking much of it. Today, he felt the distance in every frame. It was as if the school itself was telling him, "This place wasn't built for you. It tolerates you, but it doesn't expect you." That realization stung more than he wanted to admit. On the way home, he replayed the day in his mind. The assumptions, the silence, The small, sharp moments that cut deeper than insults ever could. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he could feel something shifting, something tightening inside him, something waking up. This wasn't just about a missing chapter anymore. It was about everything the world expected him not to see. Marcus spent the next few days moving through school like a person carrying a secret fire. He didn't talk about it, didn't make a scene, didn't lash out. He just watched, observed, noted every slight, every lowered expectation, every time someone tried to shrink him without saying it out loud. And with each moment, the fire inside him grew, burning slow but steady. One afternoon, instead of taking the bus home, he walked to the public library. It was an old brick building that smelled like dust and quiet, a place most of his classmates never stepped foot in unless they had to. He pushed through the heavy door and felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. Here no one stared, no one assumed, books didn't judge. They didn't follow stereotypes. They simply told what someone had dared to write. He went straight to the history section. He didn't know what he was looking for, but something pulled him to the shelves, like a memory he hadn't lived yet. He scanned the spines until he found a book about Reconstruction, another about civil rights testimonies, another about black soldiers returning home after war. He piled them on a table and opened the first one. The more he read, the more he felt the weight of what he'd been denied. Stories of people who fought against impossible odds, families torn apart and rebuilt with bare hands, towns burned because they dared to succeed, soldiers who wore the uniform of a country that didn't even treat them as citizens, men who walked into polling stations knowing they might never walk back out, women who organized boycotts, fed whole neighborhoods, kept movements alive when the world refused to see them, names that were never mentioned in school, stories that never reached a classroom. He sat there for hours, flipping through pages like he was learning a language he was always meant to speak. One story stopped him cold. A black soldier in World War II named Samuel Hale, his great-grandfather. He had never known much about the man beyond a few family stories. But here he was in a book, quoted in a testimony given to a civil rights committee decades ago. Marcus read the words slowly, feeling chills race through him. I fought for a freedom I still can't touch. But my grandson will, and he'll know I didn't stay quiet. Marcus inhaled sharply. His great-grandfather had spoken those words long before he was born, yet somehow they reached him today, as clear as if whispered in his ear. He sat back, overwhelmed, feeling a connection he'd never felt before, not to a stranger in history, but to his own blood, his own lineage, his own story. For the first time, he realized that his family didn't just survive history, they shaped it. They fought in it. They bled in it. They pushed through barriers so thick he didn't understand them until now. And the school that ripped out that chapter hadn't erased the truth. They only delayed it. Marcus closed the book and looked around the empty library. It was quiet, almost sacred. He whispered, I won't stay quiet either. The next day, he returned with a notebook. He filled it page by page with facts, quotes, dates, names, not because a teacher assigned it, because it mattered to him, because it was his. Soon, other students noticed him reading in the back of the library during lunch. Some black students came over out of curiosity. What you studying? One asked. Marcus looked up, hesitated, then slid the book toward him. Stuff they don't talk about at school. That's all it took. Within days, he had a small circle around him. Kids who were tired of feeling like they didn't belong in honors classes. Kids who had questions but no place to ask them. Kids who felt like the school only saw one version of them and ignored the rest. Marcus didn't try to lead them. He didn't give speeches. He just shared what he learned, quietly, calmly. Honestly, he helped them with assignments, showed them how to find reliable sources, encouraged them to ask more, to look deeper, to question when something didn't feel right. And as he spoke, his voice changed. It gained steadiness, confidence, purpose. One girl named Talia said, Why you know all this? Nobody else breaking down stuff like this. Marcus shrugged, because I didn't like what they left out. Another boy murmured, Man, they've been leaving stuff out since forever. Marcus nodded. Then somebody has to put it back. As the group grew, the school noticed. Teachers eyed him differently now, not with the dismissive looks they gave before, but with a subtle wariness, as if something about him had shifted. As if they no longer saw a quiet kid from a working-class neighborhood, they saw someone asking questions they didn't want asked, someone harder to push aside. One day, Ms. Grant watched him enter the classroom and frowned. Marcus, stay after. A few students looked at him with worried expressions. He nodded and stayed behind when the bell rang. Ms. Grant closed the door and turned toward him with crossed arms. I've heard you've been encouraging discussions, she said. Discussions that are disrupting the learning environment. Marcus kept his voice calm. I'm not disrupting anything. I'm studying. You're spreading information that isn't part of the curriculum. Marcus looked her straight in the eyes. Maybe the curriculum is missing things. She stiffened. You need to focus on your assigned work, not rewriting lessons. He wanted to say so many things. That he wasn't rewriting anything, he was restoring it. That the pages he found missing weren't accidents. That the stories he'd learned weren't lies, they were truths. The school was too afraid to teach. But he knew whatever he said would be used against him, so he picked up his backpack and walked out. But something was different as he stepped into the hallway. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't shrinking. The fire inside him had grown too strong. The school saw a problem. Marcus saw a mission. They wanted him silent. He decided to speak louder. He didn't know it yet, but the more he pushed for truth, the more the system would push back. And the moment he became impossible to ignore was coming faster than he expected. Marcus stands in front of the school auditorium, this time not as a scared kid, but as a young man who has learned his voice has weight. The room is packed. Students, parents, teachers, and board members who never thought a teenager could challenge them. He takes a breath, not to calm himself, but to steady the fire inside him. And then he speaks. He talks about the missing pages in the textbook. He talks about false narratives, erased ancestors, and stories buried on purpose. He shares the truths he uncovered, the documents he dug up, the elders he interviewed, and the history his own school refused to teach. Some people shift in their seats. Some look angry, some look ashamed. But everyone is listening. Then he ends with the same question that began his transformation. If our history scares you, what does that say about the world you built? Silence. Heavy, awkward, uncomfortable, necessary. The board promises a review. The local news covers the speech. Some parents protest. Others praise him, but Marcus doesn't need applause. He only wanted truth. The act closes with Marcus visiting his grandfather again. He hands him a new book, a binder full of the real history he and his team collected, printed with care. His grandfather turns the pages with trembling hands. He smiles, eyes wet, and says, "They hid what scared them. You're what scares them now." Marcus looks out the window at the school he once feared. Now, he's not running from anything. He's walking toward a future he's already begun rewriting.